Every Friday afternoon for 11 years, a delivery van from Halloway Furnishings pulled up outside a small upholstery workshop on the outskirts of Moose Jaw and dropped off another batch of damaged furniture. No call ahead, no note, just a packing slip, a deadline, and another piece of broken craftsmanship nobody at the company wanted to deal with. The woman who owned Halloway Furnishings had never once walked through that workshop door. To her, it was a line item, a vendor code, a problem that solved itself somewhere out of sight. But to the widower running the shop alone, those repairs paid for hockey registration, winter boots, and the quiet, steady life he'd built for his son, after everything else had fallen apart. Then one February morning, the van didn't come. Instead, a black SUV pulled into the gravel lot, and the same woman who had never learned his name in over a decade, stepped out looking like her entire world had come undone. Desmond Whitlock was 44 years old, and his hands told most of his story before he ever opened his mouth. Calloused across the palms, a faint white scar along his left thumb from a chisel slip a long time ago, the permanent smell of linseed oil and sawdust worked so deep into his skin that soap never quite got it out. He was a tall man, a little stooped from years, bent over workbenches, with gray starting to thread through his dark hair at the temples. He didn't smile easily, but when he did, it changed his whole face. His shop sat at the end of a gravel road past the edge of town, where the highway noise faded, and the prairie just opened up flat and quiet in every direction. The sign out front had faded from red to a dusty pink, and the front step sagged a little on the left side where the wood had softened over the years. It didn't look like much. But inside, Desmond did work that people drove 2 hours to bring him. He could look at a 100-year-old chair frame, and know, just by running his thumb along the joints, exactly where the weakness was hiding. He listened to wood and fabric and old glue the way some people listen to an engine. For the small wrongness underneath the obvious one. 6 years earlier, Desmond had lost his wife, Margaret, to a brain aneurysm that took her in the space of an afternoon, no warning, no goodbye, while she was out front watering the hanging baskets. He'd been inside making lunch. Their son Sawyer was 6 at the time. He was 12 now, quiet in the careful way kids get, when they've learned the world can change in an instant, but funny too, in flashes, when he forgot to guard himself. Desmond had rebuilt the shape of his life out of routine because routine was the only thing that held. Up at 5:30, lunch packed the night before, sitting in the fridge in the same blue container, school drop-off, workshop, school pickup, homework at the workbench while Desmond finished whatever piece was due. Dinner, usually something simple, usually eaten at the small table by the window. No trips south for the winter, no extras, no safety net beyond what he built with his own 2 hands, week after week. And those Friday deliveries from Halloway. 12 years before that black SUV ever came down his road. Desmond had been a senior restoration specialist at Halloway Furnishings, back when it was still a respected name in custom and heritage furniture across the prairies, before a sharp young executive named Vivienne Calloway took it over from her father and started reshaping it into something faster, leaner, more profitable on paper. Desmond had loved the work back then. Restoring pieces that had real history in them. Training the younger staff, being trusted with the pieces nobody else could touch. But the restructuring came fast. Departments folded into each other. The specialty restoration division, the one Desmond had spent a decade building, got cut entirely in the name of efficiency. He lost his position 8 months before Margaret died, and by the time he was grieving, he was also broke. He converted his father's old garage, the one his dad had used for small engine repair, into a one-man upholstery and restoration shop because it was the only asset he had left that wasn't already mortgaged. Local jobs kept the lights on, barely. Then, almost as an afterthought, Halloway started sending him their problem pieces. The ones too far gone for the in-house team, the custom orders that had gone sideways, the antique consignments nobody on staff knew how to fix without ruining them. No explanation ever came with the deliveries. Just a packing slip and a deadline. Desmond took every job anyway. Not because the company had ever treated him with anything resembling respect, but because the contract was steady, and steady was what a kid needed. For 11 years, Vivienne Calloway never noticed him. Or maybe she simply never had a reason to look. At 39, Vivienne was one of the youngest CEOs in the Canadian furniture and home goods industry, and she'd built that reputation on instinct, ambition, and a willingness to move fast where her father had moved carefully. Business magazines from Calgary to Toronto had run pieces on her, calling her a disruptor, praising the way she'd doubled Halloway's retail footprint in under 5 years. Competitors watched her warily, but underneath the growth, the company had started rotting in places nobody upstairs wanted to look at too closely. Quality control got thinner, supplier contracts got cheaper. The institutional knowledge that used to live in people like Desmond had been quietly stripped out, year after year, in the name of margin. It started small. A line of dining sets with a structural flaw nobody caught until customers started filing complaints. Then a second issue, this time with a flagship line of reclaimed wood furniture that had become the company's biggest seller. Pieces arriving with hairline cracks that widened within months. Then a supplier scandal, then a lawsuit, then another. Within a year, Halloway's stock had cratered on the private investment side, 2 major retail partners had cancelled their contracts, and 3 senior executives had resigned in the same quarter. Each one timing their exit just well enough to avoid looking responsible. For the first time in years, Vivian was forced to sit in a room and look at actual problems instead of growth projections. One emergency meeting, late on a Tuesday night, surfaced something that made her go still. A junior operations manager, going through years of vendor records trying to find cost savings, had stumbled onto a pattern. For over a decade, a disproportionate share of Halloway's most difficult, most expensive to fail repair and restoration work had been quietly handled, and handled well, far better than internal teams ever managed, by a single outside contractor, Desmond Whitlock, a workshop address out past the edge of town that nobody in the Calgary head office had ever visited. Vivian stared at the file for a long time, 11 years. Hundreds of pieces salvaged that should have been written off as losses. A track record that, line for line, was better than her own in-house departments. And she had never once spoken to the man. Never sent so much as a thank you card. Just packing slips and deadlines year after year, while he quietly kept a piece of her company from falling apart. The timing made it worse, not better. Halloway's newest flagship collection, the one meant to relaunch the brand's reputation after the scandals, had just failed catastrophic quality testing 2 weeks before launch. If it couldn't be fixed, and fast, there wouldn't be a relaunch. There might not be a company. So on a gray February morning, Vivian drove out past the edge of town herself. No assistant, no PR team, no warning call ahead. Just her in a black SUV, pulling into a gravel lot in front of a building with a faded pink sign, stepping carefully around the half-frozen puddles toward a sagging front step. Inside, Desmond was rewebbing the seat of an old armchair, while Sawyer sat at the small desk by the space heater, working through a math worksheet. The shop smelled like coffee and sawdust. It was modest and orderly, the kind of place that ran on discipline rather than money. Vivian stepped in quietly, and Desmond looked up. He recognized her immediately, not because they'd ever met, but because everyone in his industry knew Vivian Calloway's face from the magazine covers. There was a long beat of silence in that small room, heavy with everything neither of them said out loud. The woman whose company had been dropping broken furniture on his doorstep for 11 years was now standing in his shop, hat in hand, more or less. She explained the situation plainly, without the polish she usually wore like armor. Halloway was in real trouble. The relaunch collection had failed. The in-house team was out of ideas and out of time. She needed someone who actually understood how these pieces were built. Not someone who understood spreadsheets. Desmond listened without saying much. He wasn't smug about it, and he wasn't cold either, just careful, the way he was careful with everything. He glanced toward Sawyer, who'd stopped pretending to do his math worksheet and was watching the visitor with open curiosity. Desmond looked back at Vivian. The weight of it wasn't lost on him. This company had, in its careless way, kept food on his table for over a decade, even while it never once acknowledged him as a person. But there were other people on the other end of this now. Floor staff, warehouse workers, people with kids of their own, whose paychecks depended on whether Halloway survived the next 2 quarters. Desmond understood that kind of responsibility better than most. He agreed to take a look, not for revenge, and not because he owed Vivian anything personally. He didn't, not really. He agreed because the work mattered more than the woman who'd finally shown up asking for it. Over the following weeks, Desmond worked alongside Halloway's design and production team, and what he found wasn't subtle. Corners had been cut on joinery to save fractions of a dollar per unit. A cheaper finish had been substituted without anyone testing how it held up under real use. The whole collection had been engineered to look right in a showroom and fall apart in a living room within a year. He didn't dramatize any of it. He simplified, corrected, retested, and rebuilt, one piece at a time, the same patient way he fixed everything. At the bench, with his hands, without shortcuts. Vivienne started showing up at the shop more than the work strictly required. She watched Desmond teach two of her younger staff how to read a joint under stress without taking it apart. Watched him stop, mid-afternoon, every single day, to check Sawyer's homework before going back to the bench. She watched him turn down a faster, cheaper fix, because it wouldn't hold past the warranty period, even though nobody would have known the difference for at least a year. He had none of the polish her executive team prized, and all of the substance it had been quietly losing for years. One evening, after a 16-hour day spent rebuilding a prototype from scratch, Vivienne came back to the shop, not for business this time, just to see. She found Sawyer sorting invoices into folders at the desk, Desmond cleaning his tools for the night, a pot of soup warming on the small stove in the back. It was an ordinary scene, built entirely out of effort rather than comfort, and it landed harder than she expected. For years she had optimized everything that could be measured, and overlooked everyone who couldn't be. Standing in that small warm room, she felt the size of that mistake in a way no spreadsheet had ever managed to show her. The relaunch collection stabilized. Investor confidence came back, not all the way, but enough. The board stopped talking about emergency sale options. Halloway survived, not cleanly, not without scars, but it survived, and Vivienne made a decision that surprised most of the people around her. She offered Desmond a senior position overseeing quality and restoration across the company, with terms built around his life rather than the other way around. No relocation, no late meetings that ran past 5, full authority to walk away from any decision he thought was wrong. It wasn't charity, it was the most strategically sound hire she'd made in years, and she knew it. Desmond took 2 weeks to decide, mostly because he needed to know it wouldn't change what mattered most. Being home for Sawyer, being present, being the kind of father he'd promised himself he'd stay no matter what the job demanded. When he finally said yes, it was on his own terms, and Vivienne agreed to every one of them without argument. Months later, Friday afternoons looked different out past the edge of town. No more unmarked vans dropping off broken pieces with no explanation. Instead, there were real conversations, real planning, a partnership that had taken 11 years, and one collapse to finally become honest. Sawyer told his friends his dad basically saved a furniture company, which wasn't far from the truth. Vivienne dropped by sometimes with no agenda at all, just coffee and conversation, having finally learned something that 11 years of packing slips had never taught her. That a company doesn't survive on scale, or branding, or confidence alone. It survives because somewhere, quietly, someone is still willing to fix what everyone else gave up on.